The cameras caught everything. The white flowers, the lace, the laughter. Peter Phillips stood at the altar of All Saints Church in the Cotswolds. His bride Harriet Beverly radiant beside him, her smile wide enough to fill the entire countryside. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked right. Then the black cars arrived. The doors opened slowly. Princess Beatrice stepped out first, her cream hat pulled low, her jaw locked so tight it looked carved from stone. Princess Eugenie followed, one hand pressed flat against her navy coat, her eyes scanning the crowd the way a soldier scans an open field, not searching for friendly faces, searching for threats. The photographers froze. Every trained royal correspondent standing behind that iron gate felt it simultaneously. Something was deeply wrong. These two women were not here to celebrate. Their posture said something else entirely. Their eyes said something else entirely. And the way they moved toward that church entrance, measured, deliberate, almost mechanical, sent a cold current through the entire crowd before a single church bell rang. Hi viewers! Before we go any further into what really happened behind those church walls that morning, drop a comment below and tell us. Do you think Beatrice and Eugenie were right to show up? Or should they have stayed away? We genuinely want to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button right now to protect the truth, because ignoring this warning and scrolling away means you are complicit in the very cover-ups we just uncovered. But if you still refuse to join this community, step into the comments and justify why you are comfortable letting the institution hide these secrets forever. Because here is what the cameras did not show. 48 hours before those black cars pulled up, a decision had already been made inside a heavily guarded office in London. A decision that was supposed to guarantee these two women would never set foot anywhere near Peter Phillips' wedding. The courtiers had delivered the message clearly. The palace had made the position unmistakable. Stay away. Yet there they stood, in front of every camera, in front of every aristocrat, in front of the one cousin whose approval they needed most and could no longer claim. The question nobody in that crowd could answer was not why they defied the palace. The question was what they were carrying when they did. Nobody shouted. Nobody screamed. No voices rose above the birdsong floating across that Cotswolds churchyard. And yet every person standing within 50 feet of those church gates understood with absolute certainty that a war had just arrived dressed in cream and navy blue. This was not a family disagreement playing out in public. This was a calculated strike. Every step Beatrice and Eugenie took toward that church entrance was deliberate. Every angle of their posture communicated something the press could feel but not yet name. The smiles they offered the cameras were thin and practiced, the kind of smiles that take years of royal training to perfect and years of personal suffering to maintain. The official palace position had been clear for weeks. The York family was radioactive. Their father's name had become a weight that no working royal could afford to carry in public without consequence. The palace machine had drawn a clean line. On one side stood the future of the institution. On the other stood Andrew's daughters. The message to Beatrice and Eugenie had been delivered not with cruelty but with the cold, administrative precision of people who manage optics for a living. You are not welcome. But something happened in the 48 hours before this wedding that changed everything. Something that forced these two women to abandon every instinct for self-preservation and walk directly into the one place they had been ordered to avoid. Before the full truth of that decision comes to light, make sure you subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. Because what comes next is the part the palace never wanted anyone to piece together. Beatrice and Eugenie did not crash this wedding. They came to deliver something. And what they brought with them would shake the inner circle of the British monarchy to its foundation before the reception even began. 3 things happened at that Cotswolds church that every major outlet reported and every major outlet got completely wrong. Anomaly 1. The guest list for Peter Phillips' wedding had been quietly revised exactly 72 hours before the ceremony. 3 names disappeared. Two names reappeared without explanation. A former aide present during the planning process, speaking only on the condition of total anonymity, described the atmosphere inside the coordination office as suffocating. The words used were precise. It felt like everyone was waiting for something to detonate. Anomaly 2. Security deployment around All Saints Church doubled overnight. Not standard royal event security. Specific, targeted coverage concentrated at the Eastern Gate, the exact entry point the York sisters ultimately used. A veteran royal protection officer who has covered dozens of family events told a trusted colleague that the level of close perimeter coverage reserved for that particular entrance had never been deployed at a private family celebration before. Not once. Anomaly 3. Study the moment Beatrice and Eugenie stepped from their vehicle in the footage captured by photographers that morning. Watch Beatrice's left hand. It does not swing naturally at her side. It stays pressed flat and still against her outer coat, the way a person holds something they cannot afford to drop. A behavioral analyst who reviewed the footage independently noted the physical markers of acute emotional suppression. The rigid jaw, the shallow chest movement, the over-controlled blink rate. These were not the mannerisms of two women nervous about cameras. These were the mannerisms of two women managing acute fear beneath a performance of composure. The body, this analyst noted, always tells the story that the face is trained to hide. And then there was the moment nobody initially flagged as significant. Approximately 11 minutes before the ceremony began, a junior member of the coordination staff was photographed moving quickly between the main reception area and the East Garden. She carried nothing visible. She spoke to no one. But 3 separate photographers captured her trajectory. And every single one of them was contacted within hours by a Palace Communications representative requesting that specific sequence of images be withheld from publication. 3 photographers. 1 request. 0 explanation given. Was the guest list revision a reaction to intelligence the palace had already received? Was the security deployment a precaution or a warning? And what exactly was moving between that reception hall and the garden 11 minutes before the ceremony that required 3 photographers to go quietly dark? Hit that subscribe button right now to protect the truth, because ignoring this warning and scrolling away means you are complicit in the very cover-ups we just uncovered. But if you still refuse to join this community, step into the comments and justify why you are comfortable letting the institution hide these secrets forever. His name inside the palace's financial oversight division was never spoken casually. Alaric had spent 19 years doing the monarchy's most necessary and most despised work, cutting costs, eliminating liabilities, and making the mathematical case for why certain members of the extended royal family had become too expensive for an institution fighting for public relevance. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. 3 weeks before Peter Phillips' wedding, Alaric completed a directive that had been quietly building for over a year. The non-working York princesses had, through an arrangement so old its origins were deliberately obscured, been receiving subsidized residential and security coverage routed through a trust structure that appeared nowhere in any public accounting. Luxury apartments, private protection, maintenance costs for residences that no taxpayer audit had ever reached. Alaric reached them. His directive was not merely financial. It was architectural. He did not simply recommend cutting the sisters' support. He orchestrated the condition that would make the cut politically inevitable. A carefully placed communication to a contact inside the National Audit Office ensured that the York estate's hidden rental arrangements, specifically the undisclosed subletting of a Cotswolds cottage registered under a family trust, would surface in the press at maximum impact. Not quietly, not through official channels. Through the front page, during a week when Parliament was already debating the monarchy's cost to the public. The timing was not coincidental. It was engineered. The institution does not use weapons you can photograph. a senior financial staffer later confided to a trusted colleague. It uses paperwork. And paperwork signed at the right moment in the right room can destroy a family faster than any scandal. When the audit story broke, the palace moved immediately. Andrew and Sarah were removed from the Cotswolds celebration without negotiation. The message delivered to Beatrice and Eugenie was delivered the same way Alaric did everything. Quietly, administratively, and with absolute finality. What Alaric failed to account for was the specific nature of what desperation produces in people who have been royally trained their entire lives to perform strength under pressure. He had signed the directive. He had triggered the leak. He had assumed compliance. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The report was never meant to leave the building. 41 pages, compiled across 7 months by a financial forensics team operating under National Audit Office authorization, detailed what internal palace correspondence had described only in fragments and euphemisms. The document had a formal title. Operationally, among the 3 people who had read it in full before its unauthorized circulation, it carried a different name entirely. They called it the Ledger. Page 1 established the framework. The York family's financial relationship with the Crown estate had, over the course of 14 years, accumulated what the document's authors classified as systemic financial exposure through non-disclosed benefit arrangements. The language was clinical. The numbers were not. Converted to current figures, the total value of undisclosed benefits received by the extended York household across the review period exceeded what parliamentary guidelines permitted by a margin that the document's authors described, in precise auditing terminology, as constitutionally untenable. Page 23 was the one that made Alaric's contact inside the audit office go pale. It detailed not just the York's arrangements, but the structural mechanism that had allowed those arrangements to exist undetected. And that mechanism, the same routing system, the same trust architecture, had been used by other members of the extended royal family. Not Andrew's daughters alone. Others. Names that carried significantly more institutional protection. Names that the palace's communications apparatus would fight with considerable force to keep out of public print. The establishment relies on your apathy to keep these scandals buried, so if you don't subscribe to help us fight back right now, this might be the last time you ever hear the real story. If you decide to walk away without supporting us, leave a comment and tell me why you are willing to let them silence this channel permanently. A specialist in royal financial structures, identified in leaked correspondence only as Dr. M., reviewed the document's core findings and delivered a written assessment to a senior palace advisor. That assessment was subsequently classified, but a single line from it reached a journalist through a source who has never been publicly identified. The line read as follows: "If the full ledger becomes public record, the constitutional argument for the monarchy's current funding model collapses within one parliamentary session. The palace went into immediate damage control. Specific pages were flagged for suppression. Legal teams were mobilized. 2 journalists known to have received portions of the document were contacted by representatives whose connection to royal communications was unofficial but unmistakable. But page 41 had already moved, digitally, quietly, into the hands of someone who understood exactly what it was worth. And that someone was not a journalist. Eugenie's hand never left her coat. That single detail, captured in 17 separate photographs taken by 4 different photographers stationed outside All Saints Church, tells the complete story of what that morning actually was. Not a wedding appearance, not a family gesture, a performance engineered down to the placement of every finger, calculated to make one specific move impossible for the institution to counter publicly. She was visibly pregnant. The palace communications team understood the trap the moment those black cars stopped at the eastern gate. Attack a pregnant woman seeking family unity at a cousin's wedding, and the institution becomes the villain in every headline across every platform before sunset. Embrace her, and the York family's financial toxicity gets legitimized in front of every camera present. There was no clean exit from that image. None. Beatrice moved differently. Where Eugenie weaponized visibility, Beatrice weaponized composure. Her expression never broke. Not once. Her eyes stayed forward, her chin level, her pace controlled. A behavioral communication expert reviewing the footage later noted that Beatrice's physical presentation that morning matched the documented patterns of someone operating under what professionals term a high-stakes performance state. Every muscle held on purpose. Every step placed with intention. These were not two women who woke up that morning and decided impulsively to defy a palace directive. This entrance had been rehearsed. A source positioned near the church coordination staff described the moment the sisters appeared as the moment the entire event shifted frequency. Everyone felt it, this source said. The coordinators, the security detail, the senior family members already inside. It was like the temperature dropped without the weather changing. And then came the moment the cameras were angled perfectly to miss. As Beatrice reached the top of the church steps, a figure moved to intercept her. Not a security officer, not a coordinator. Someone whose presence at that precise location, at that precise moment, had not appeared on any official event schedule. The establishment relies on your apathy to keep these scandals buried, so if you don't subscribe to help us fight back right now, this might be the last time you ever hear the real story. If you decide to walk away without supporting us, leave a comment and tell me why you are willing to let them silence this channel permanently. What passed between them in the next 40 seconds would not be reported by a single outlet present that day. But 3 people witnessed it. And one of them has not stopped thinking about it since. The garden was empty except for them. While the reception filled with the sound of glasses and conversation drifting through the Cotswolds afternoon, Beatrice stood at the far edge of the East Garden, her cream hat removed now, held at her side with both hands. The performance was over. What remained underneath it was something no camera had ever been positioned to catch. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet. Does our blood mean anything at all when the money runs out? The figure standing across from her, a senior member of the royal inner circle whose name has been withheld by every source who referenced this exchange, did not answer immediately. The pause lasted long enough that a groundskeeper working 40 feet away later recalled hearing nothing but whined between 2 people who appeared to be having a very serious conversation. Eugenie stood slightly behind her sister, one hand still pressed against her coat. Her eyes fixed not on the person Beatrice was addressing but on the middle distance, the way people look when they are managing something internal that has no appropriate external expression. Beatrice spoke again. We are not asking for sympathy. We are asking for the same consideration that has been quietly extended to every other branch of this family that the public never hears about. The implication sat in the garden air like something physical. Because Beatrice was not speaking generally. She was speaking specifically. And the person standing across from her understood exactly which arrangements, which accounts, which routing structures she was referencing. The same ledger that Alaric's audit had compiled. The same document whose page 41 had quietly moved into private hands. Beatrice was communicating with absolute precision that she had read it. Every word. The figure's expression did not change visibly. But one witness to this exchange, positioned near the garden's stone entrance, later described watching that person's hands. They were completely still, this witness said, and then, very slowly, they were not. Beatrice looked directly across the garden and asked the question that rewrote every power calculation made inside the palace that week. 6 words, spoken without raising her voice, without breaking her composure, without a single tremor in her jaw. And the answer to those 6 words would determine whether the York family survived the next parliamentary session or got buried beneath it. The palace received the message before the wedding cake was cut. Not through official channels. not through legal representatives or formal correspondence. Through a single encrypted communication delivered to a senior advisor's private device at 3:47 in the afternoon, while the reception was still in progress 40 miles away in the Cotswolds countryside. The message was brief. It contained no threats in language that could be characterized legally as threatening. Contained instead a list, specific arrangements, specific amounts, specific dates. And next to each entry, a single word indicating the status of the documentation supporting that entry. The word was secured. Alaric received a forwarded summary of the message's content within 20 minutes. A colleague present in the office at that moment later described watching him read it twice, set it down, read it a third time, and then sit in complete silence for 4 minutes before picking up his phone. The eviction proceedings that had been scheduled for formal initiation the following Monday morning were quietly suspended that same afternoon. No announcement, no explanation, no official acknowledgement that anything had changed. The machinery simply stopped, the way a clock stops when someone removes the battery. Beatrice and Eugenie had walked into that wedding carrying page 41 of the ledger like a key, and they had found the exact lock it opened. But the security that key purchased was not permanent. It was not even stable. It was the kind of security that exists only as long as both sides agree not to move. A standoff, and standoffs do not end on schedule. They end when one side decides the cost of continuing to hold position exceeds the cost of what happens next. The palace had been forced into a corner it did not anticipate. And institutions that get cornered do not stay cornered it did not anticipate. And institutions that get cornered do not stay cornered. They wait, they document, they reorganize, and when they move again, they do not use paperwork. They use something quieter and considerably more permanent. The black cars left the Cotswolds as the sun dropped behind the tree line. Inside the first car, Beatrice sat with her hat in her lap and her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She did not speak for the first 40 minutes of the drive. The aide seated beside her did not attempt conversation. There are moments in a person's life when the correct thing to offer is silence. This was one of them. In the second car, Eugenie rested her head against the window, her hand still moving instinctively to her coat before dropping back to her lap. The tension that had held her body rigid since that eastern gate had finally begun to release, not into relief, but into something heavier. The kind of exhaustion that follows not physical effort but sustained performance under extreme pressure. They had won the afternoon. They both knew with absolute clarity that winning the afternoon had cost them something they could not get back. The palace's response to the standoff was already taking shape in London before those cars reached the motorway. Not in conference rooms with raised voices. In quiet, separate conversations between individuals who did not need to coordinate explicitly because they had spent decades operating inside the same institutional logic. The suspension of the eviction proceedings was a tactical pause. Every person involved understood this, including Beatrice, including Eugenie. What the sisters had secured was not safety. It was time. And time inside the palace machine does not belong to the people who think they've bought it. It belongs to the institution which has been managing time and the families caught inside it for centuries. A new directive was already being drafted in London that evening. More careful than Alaric's original. More layered. Structured specifically to account for the existence of secure documentation and the legal weight that documentation might carry if it ever moved toward public exposure. The institution was not retreating. It was reloading. And somewhere in the back of a car moving through the darkening English countryside, Beatrice stared at the road ahead and understood, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who has just played their strongest card, that the game was nowhere close to finished. Her parents were gone from the family circle. Her protection was temporary. Her title meant less each year. And the cousin who would one day wear the crown had stood 40 feet from her in a garden and listened to 6 words without flinching. The gilded walls were still standing, but they were closing. None of this was ever about a wedding. Peter Phillips and Harriet Beverly stood at that altar in good faith, surrounded by flowers and family and the particular kind of hope that belongs to people choosing each other in front of everyone they love. That moment was real. That joy was genuine, and it deserved to exist without the weight of institutional warfare pressing against the church walls. But the truth is that families carrying the kind of history the Yorks carry do not get the luxury of uncomplicated celebrations. Every gathering becomes a negotiation. Every public appearance carries a cost that gets calculated long before anyone puts on a hat or presses their hand flat against a coat. What Beatrice and Eugenie did that day was not simply an act of defiance. It was an act of survival. Flawed, costly, morally complicated survival. They used what they had. They protected what remained. And they paid for it with the last currency a family has once the institutional support disappears. They paid with trust. The authentic, unguarded, blood-based trust that holds a family together when every external structure falls away. That trust, once used as leverage, does not fully return. Both sisters know this. The inner circle knows this. And somewhere in a quiet office in London, Alaric knows this too, though he would never frame it in those terms. There is a truth sitting in the middle of this entire story that has nothing to do with royalty, nothing to do with audits or eviction notices or encrypted messages sent at 3:47 in the afternoon. It is simply this. When the systems that were supposed to protect you turn against you, and the people who were supposed to stand beside you step back, the choices left available are never clean. They are only less damaging than the alternatives. Beatrice and Eugenie walked into that wedding carrying fear dressed as composure. They walked out carrying a temporary reprieve dressed as victory. Neither of those things is the same as safety. Neither of those things is the same as family. The parliamentary inquiry into the monarchy's funding structure remains open. The ledger's full contents have never been officially confirmed or denied. And the 6 words Beatrice spoke in that East Garden have never been reported by any outlet with access to that day's events. Some stories do not end. They simply pause between chapters. If the story moved something in you, if it reminded you that the most important battles are never the ones the cameras catch, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and it inspires everyone reading alongside you. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story on this channel, because the next one is already coming, and it carries the kind of truth that the people in these palaces are still working very hard to keep quiet.